Sounds good.
All right, so we are joined from Indianapolis, Indiana, by Dr. Carlotta Berry, one of the leaders in robotics education there at the in the Rose Hulman Institute of Technology in Terre Haute. But she's joining us from her home in Indianapolis today. We've got a room full here with us at Velma Jackson High School, and we're recording this for all of our computer science engineering classes in Madison County schools for our middle school and high school students and for our YouTube channel. So we thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
Thank you for having me.
And now, before we get into what it is you do on the everyday and some of the trends that you're seeing in technology, you have a very interesting educational background because you're originally from Nashville, but then you went to Spelman and Georgia Tech. So you were able to get 2 bachelor's degrees, which is incredible in itself, and one from a very prestigious HBCU and one from a very prestigious PWI. So that's an interesting experience in itself. So we like to talk about college choices for our young people. And obviously, there's a lot of them out there. So talk a little bit about that, because that's an interesting combination.
Absolutely. And so when I was in high school, I always wanted to be a math teacher. My goal was to be a calculus or trig teacher. And I was in a program called Inroads. And Inroads was a program for professional development to get diverse students prepared for internships in corporate America. And I had a career counselor say, "You're so good at math and science, you should really consider engineering." And at the time, I didn't know what engineering is. Surprisingly enough, a lot of students still don't to this day.
Yeah.
And so going to the library, I looked up engineer because I thought it was a train conductor. And I was like, I don't know why she's asking me to drive trains. I'm not doing that. And so after going to the library and doing a little research on engineering, I said, looks okay. But as we all know, there's a diversity problem in engineering for women, for Black and brown people. So I didn't really know anyone who's an engineer. I had never seen an engineer before. So I decided, I always knew I was going to go to Spelman. And because this engineering thing looked like it might work, I decided to do a dual degree program between Spelman and Georgia Tech. The program has now expanded. It's actually between several HBCUs in school. So now you could do one between like Spelman and University of Michigan, or Spelman and RPI, et cetera.
Wow.
But at the time, I didn't really want to leave Atlanta. So in this program, you get 2 degrees in 5 years. So I was at Spelman for 3.5 years, and I finished all of my requirements for my math degree. And then you go to Georgia Tech and you do all of your engineering courses. And so in the end of that 5 years, you get the 2 degrees. I don't know if I absolutely recommend that for a lot of people, because engineering is an intense major. And it does require, like my students, I tell them, take a humanities sometimes or a music class so that you're using the left and right side of your brain so that you have a break from just technical classes all day. Well, doing a dual degree program, by the time you get to the second school, you're done with your humanities, your arts, your geography, your history. So that means all day long, you're just getting hit with math, calculus, engineering, labs. And it's rather intense. So it's almost, not being able to use that left and right side of your brain at the same time does not give you a break, but it can be done. And I did it. So there you go.
Yeah, and now one thing I always like to ask to people with this combo is you have an HBCU undergrad, a PWI undergrad, and a PhD from Vanderbilt, which is a PWI. So obviously these are 3 great schools. And, for our young men that are interested in going to HBCU, Morehouse right there with Spelman, and Clark Atlanta right there in that area, the triad in Atlanta there. So what are some things that HBCU offers that a PWI doesn't, and things that a PWI offers that a HBCU doesn't?
Yeah, I get that question a lot because I've actually taught at a HBCU and a PWI as well. And what I will say is that if there had not been a Spelman, I probably would not have graduated from Georgia Tech. There is something that a HBCU gives you, a sense of community and belonging and support that you don't typically see at a PWI. I try to foster that with my Black and brown students at the PWI where I work now, and they can get that through organizations like the National Society of Black Engineers, the Society of Hispanic and Professional Engineers, SACNIS, ACES. There's one for Indigenous people. There's one for Asian students, etc. But that HBCU had a sense of community that each one or a rising tide lifts all boats. So each one was there to support you to the end. Like, for example, at Spelman, all of my professors knew my name. All the classes were small. If you were missing from class, they realized that they might know who your roommate was and tell your roommate to come wake you up and have you come to class. when I wasn't doing well on an exam, the professor would write a note on the exam and say, I need you to come talk to me. You didn't do too well. So that level of one-on-one personal connection, you may not get at a lot of PWIs. One reason is because a lot of them are just so much larger. I had never been in a class with 200 students until I got to Georgia Tech. And those professors did not typically have office hours like a smaller school would. So it's almost small school versus large school as much as it's HBCU versus PWI.
Yeah.
Because at Georgia Tech, I was essentially taught by the grad students and the teaching assistants because the professors were busy in their research lab with their graduate students, et cetera. So one of the things I try to emulate in my teaching at a small PWI is that softer side or that softer touch of individual attention and that support that you would typically get in a high school classroom. Because just because you've now gone from 12th grade to a freshman in college doesn't mean you have automatically learned how to do college. I have blog posts on my website about this, about knowing how to study, knowing how to go to office hours, knowing how to ask questions, take notes, join a study group. And some of those things are not going to necessarily happen if you're at a PWI or a larger school, if it's not student-centered, teaching focused. And I felt like Georgia Tech was honestly a little bit of an engineering factory, right? They bring you in, they crank it up, and they chug you out. But I never really felt that sense of community and belonging. You know, I never had any professors who looked like me, acted like me, seemed invested in me, mentored me, et cetera. So I had to take some of what had been built in me from Spelman in order to be successful at Georgia Tech. One of the things I say is I have one daughter and she's extremely shy. If you're going to go to a PWI or a larger school, you can absolutely be successful from there. But there are some things that you're going to have in yourself that you need to bring out to do that. And that may be being a little bit more outgoing to seek out the resources and support that you need.
Yeah, and then you made history when you went to Vanderbilt to get a PhD. You were the first woman to get a degree in electrical engineering at Vanderbilt. So
Second
you,
Black woman.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You were the first person in your family to get a PhD.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely true. So my mom has a master's degree. My dad doesn't even have a college degree. And so my family had zero understanding of my journey. And in fact, when I was an engineer at Ford Motor Company and Detroit Edison, both in Michigan, and I had told them I was going to quit my job to go get my graduate degree because, that was just really where my passion was, because math teacher, engineering professor, easy transition. But I wasn't going to give up on my dream to be an educator. My mom and my friends were like, oh my God, you already make more money than anybody else in our family. What do you mean you're going to quit to go and get more teaching, to get more education? They could not understand it. They thought I was crazy. They were like, you're already more educated than any of us are, all these degrees, you're making all this money. What do you mean you're going back to school again? And it's really about living out your passion, your purpose, and doing what you're meant to do, because I have impacted probably more people in my lifetime as a professor than I ever would have as an engineer working in that factory at Ford or in that plant at Detroit Edison. It's just, you have to walk out that vision.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said yourself that you never saw engineers that looked like you. And even there wasn't a lot of women engineers either. So it was a gender thing and a race thing. So it was a double minority. And what drove you not only to pursue engineering, but to pursue the electrical engineering? Because obviously engineering has several disciplines, and we've talked about a few of them. But what led you to specifically focus on the electrical and computer engineering side?
So I kind of fell into it a little, but being that I got a math degree from Spelman, I was looking for a discipline that would kind of align my interests. And I learned that electrical engineering is one of the more math intensive disciplines of engineering. And I wanted to do something where I was still leaning into my strong suits, into my skill sets. One of the things I advise my students about a lot is you have to know yourself. They'll come to me and say, should I go to grad school or not? I can't answer that question for you. All I can say is go and do a self-assessment of what you're good at. Is it math? Is it science? Is it building things? Is it writing code? Is it programming? Is it writing papers? Whatever that is. But I can't advise you if you don't know yourself, because I can give guidance. I'm not a teller. I am an advisor. And so a lot of that was saying, okay, well, if electrical engineering is the most math intensive one, I think that's where I want to be. And then based upon my classes, controls kind of gravitated to me. Controls and robotics are pretty well connected, because controls is basically designing a system so that it functions in a certain way. And then robotics is just a matter of the thing that I control is a robot. But controls is what I did as an engineer. I was a controls engineer, which means I worked in a plant. We did have robots, but you also worked on the assembly line. So you would look at conveyor belts and machines and how things have to integrate together in order to, the plant I worked in was a windshield factory, in order to produce the car windshield. So controls and robotics marry together closely, and controls also has a pretty good amount of math in it. So it was really a matter of aligning myself with the discipline that I identified the most with. Unfortunately, now with FIRST Robotics and other high school robotics competitions, we're seeing a lot of students gravitating to mechanical engineering, and mechanical engineering is getting huge because in their mind, they think that's what robotics means. And I have to tell my students, no, robots have a brain, they have a controller. That's computer science and software engineering. They have sensors, they have controls, that's electrical engineering. They do also have wheels and gears and transmissions, which is mechanical engineering. But robotics is multidisciplinary. So there are many pathways in and out. And so you really want to identify what resonates with you. I've had students leave and go and do an internship and come back to school and change their major and say, I don't like that. And I'm like, exactly. Right. So it's just really a matter of what excites you about STEM, and that tells you where you should be.
Absolutely. And then, I mentioned to you, we have an engineering and robotics academy here in Madison
Yeah.
County Schools, that we have it on campus at one of our high schools in Ridgeland. And we also have it at our career center that any student in the district can do 2 years and go ahead and get those skills. Now we see on the media all the time, about robots taking jobs and AI taking jobs. And you've been in Ford's magazine, you've been in Black Enterprise talking about, the skills that are going to be necessary in these careers that don't exist yet, but these young people need to be familiar with these skills, because the jobs aren't going away, but the skills required for the jobs are changing.
Absolutely. And like I said, I used to work in manufacturing, and what you really want to see is the job that person may be concerned about being taken away is something you typically don't want a human doing anyway. I give workshops when we talk about that robots are ideal for tasks that are dull, dirty, and dangerous. So the things that the robot would be doing is not typically something you want a human doing for a long period of time, because that's what causes carpal tunnel syndrome. That's what causes you to get brain fog and you to get tired and you start making mistakes, which means it becomes dangerous. You could hurt yourself, etc. So what you really would want to do is take that person, replace the robot, and elevate them to the level of being the robot operator, the robot programmer, the robot technician, giving them those skill sets that are now transferable to somewhere else, as opposed to somebody standing in front of a conveyor belt all day, inserting a widget into a hole, right? That's something the robot can do. It'd be better for this person to be able to troubleshoot and debug if the robot breaks down and crashes into the conveyor belt, or reprogram the robot when the widget needs to go to a new location. Those are transferable skills that they can now use, and that elevates them also to a space where they are not putting their health in danger with their job every day. Absolutely.
Now, one thing, and I talked about, I'm real big on choices. I want kids to have options when they graduate from high school. Is this a field where you would necessarily have to get a 4-year degree? Because like I said, we have the Engineering Robotics Academy where they're able to get certifications at high school. We have a great community college system in Mississippi where they can get associates and technical certificates in engineering. And also the military is an option that is really not talked about when it comes to technical and engineering training. So if a kid's like, maybe I don't want to take on the financial responsibility for my family to go to college, I don't really want to do the 4 years of classes, but I really want to work in this field. What type of entry areas are there in engineering and robotics?
So I actually used to teach engineering technology students, which is a 2-year degree. And one of the things that you have to think about is some of the things I just mentioned are technologists. They're not necessarily engineers. What engineers do is they typically do the high-level system design, but they're not going to be the ones on a day-to-day basis who are supporting and maintaining this technology. That's what engineering technologists do, and that's a 2-year degree. So for example, as I said, The engineer may design the assembly line, the robots, the conveyor belts, the widgets, and all of that originally. But then in the day-to-day operations, that's typically the electricians, the machinists, et
Yep.
cetera. They will do the maintenance. They will do any debugging and troubleshooting if it goes down. They will do basic changing in the code. If it has a PLC, a programmable logic controller, that would be ladder logic. All that stuff is done by the technicians. Engineers with their 4-year degree have to understand it to design it, but the day-to-day maintenance is the technicians. That's what they do. So those are examples of people with a 2-year degree who are intimately involved in that process. When I worked at Ford Motor Company, that's who I worked with as an engineer. I worked with the technicians in order to maintain the equipment, to fix the equipment, to install new equipment when a new design went in. So no, there are many, like I said, entry points and exit points. People always talk about the leaky pipeline when it comes to women, Black and brown people in STEM. I'm like, it's not a pipeline, it's an obstacle course. And those obstacles are there, but also because it's not a pipeline, there is no one way in and one way out. There's a lot of pathways in both directions.
Absolutely. And if somebody wants to, we've had some military people talk about, I fell into an associate's in electrical engineering in the Air Force, and then they paid for me to go do to finish my 4 years. So it's not just, I have to go to 4 years right out of high school. You can get into this field, learn it, get some experience, and maybe find a way to pay it, or go to college part-time while you're learning and getting paid. So a lot of
student debt right now is so high that any way that you can get a free education, I highly encourage you to take it.
Yeah, and especially in minority communities and rural communities, and I'll be the first person to tell you they've been shut out in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of more options now to get involved in this, because like we said, these jobs are changing and these jobs are not going to go away. We need a diverse group in those, which is what I wanted to talk about next. And I know you've talked about, and we had a guest a few weeks ago that talked about this, about when these things are programmed, there's and again, this doesn't mean people that are programming it are evil. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean they're racist, but people do not understand perspectives of people that they are not. So that's why there's such a need for diversity, not only for women, but and we'll have some first generations Americans that'll see this later. We need immigrants. We need people that are of Black descent. We need people of Asian descent. We need people of Hispanic descent to get into these fields, to bring as much knowledge and experience as possible. Because as we see the healthcare industry, that's relying more and more on AI and more on technology. We don't need people misdiagnosed. We need everybody to have, we need public health to be across the board. And then even when it comes to manufacturing, you have to look, you just talked about the safety. We have to look at the safety of everybody. If we don't have any women designing a product, a man may be unaware of health issues a woman deals with. So it really needs to have everybody at the table.
One of the examples I give of that is several years ago, when they first designed crash test dummies for cars. They made them the size of average males. And then they soon discovered that, as you know, those commercials we used to see with the car crashing into things, there had been no consideration for what happens to a child in those simulations when there's a crash, what happens to a woman who may be smaller than a man, what happens to a pregnant woman. And so they had to go back to the drawing board and make new crash test dummies, the size of a child, the size of a woman, the size of a pregnant person. And what that told you is that there were no women on the team to begin with, because at that point, one of them would have shared, hey, there's no dummies that represents me. And other kinds of considerations we've seen about that is designing electronics and technology and things, and not thinking about how do people with smaller hands or smaller stature use them. I've done talks also. They had chat bots at one time that would not recognize female voices or the voices of people with accents.
Wow.
And so all of these things explain why we have to have diverse members on teams. They've also, we've seen a lot of things from Joy Bumalawimi on coded bias and facial recognition. I remember when I was a grad student, they had a facial recognition algorithm on a robot that only recognized peach colored skin, because it was trained on the images of most of the grad students, and there were very few grad students who were Black. So the robot could recognize when other people walked in the room and would greet them and say hello because the software was trained on. I walked in the room and it would say nothing. So these are the
Wow.
kind of things that happen. And it's kind of like I give the quote about, that there's the turtle is on the bank and says to the fish, "How's the water?" And the fish is like, "What's water?" Right? And so it's kind of like when you're in the water, you don't recognize that there is anything else. And so, like you said, when you're on a team that is very uniform and everybody looks the same, you don't ever consider there's some other experience that we are not examining in this process, because everyone in here is a monolith. They all interact and look the same. And that's a challenge and a problem.
Absolutely, and it's why in here in Mississippi we have some great engineering programs. Jackson State HBCU here in Jackson has one of the newer engineering programs in the country, and then even at the PWIs, Mississippi State, I went to LSU, Ole Miss. They all have these NSBE chapters, which do a great job of plugging in Black engineers into these companies. And there's also associations for Hispanic engineers, Asian engineers, and they because the knowledge part is important, but the networking part, these companies want to diversify, getting your name out there, being a part of these student organizations. You can really find a place that wants young people that are excited about this and have these skills to get in these companies and really make a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's why it's so important for people such as myself to add our voices to this chorus, because when you know better, you do better. But if you don't know, you can't. And you do hear that lots of like, I just didn't know. Well, you don't, but now that you do, let's discuss how we can rectify and correct the situation.
Absolutely. Now, before I get to the students' questions, we got to talk about your kind of revolution you had during COVID, because you kind of did a pivot on things and you started teaching robotics online on YouTube, and you
I
became
did, which is why, I wanted to show a
you became
video.
kind of you became kind of a viral superstar there overnight.
I did.
Because
I don't know if viral is the word, but I'll take it. So what happened is, thank God I had applied for sabbatical. And sabbatical is basically when you take a year away from your job to go and explore some new area or some new thing. I do this every 6 years. And for this one, I had decided to work for a pharmaceutical company as a robotics engineer, do controls and industrial engineering to improve on some of my skills, because it had been several years since I left Ford in Detroit Edison. Well, because of the pandemic, I did work at the pharmaceutical company, but almost everyone was gone home. So that left me with a lot of idle time. And so after the George Floyd killing, there was a community online on Twitter in particular, but also Instagram and TikTok, who had come together and said, we really want to talk about what it's like to be a Black person in STEM, because once again, we need to really amplify what we do if we want to grow the community. And Black in the Ivory was born out of that, and Black Birders Week was born out of that, and then the Black in X movement was created. And part of that was I co-founded Black in Engineering and Black in Robotics with some of my colleagues. And I was at home and people were tweeting like, I am so intrigued, like you, about what you do. I'm so curious. And I was just thinking, I teach every day. I mean, why can't I do this online? I do it, it's not even like I have to get the materials. I have them, right? I have these conversations with my students every day. And one thing I say in my presentations is that if only my students who pay that ridiculously high tuition get the benefit of the knowledge that I have, then I'm doing it wrong. And so I just started sharing these snippets on social media. I started doing quizzes on Black in Engineering and on my Twitter account. And people were like, I have no clue what you're asking, but just because I want to know, I'm going to try anyway. And I found that people were hungry and thirsty to know about these things. And since then, it has continued. And crazy as it sounds, I've been getting awards for doing something that I had been doing for years, only because now the visibility is so much more, right? I'm now not just doing it. My classroom is now the world, robotics for the streets, like I say. And so because of that, I now have people everywhere who are just like, I know something about a robot. Through Black in Robotics, we actually do workshops online. One of the things I found is that when I tried to put my daughter in online workshops and computing camps, they were hundreds and thousands of dollars. who can afford that? So Black in Robotics workshops are really $20, $25. We have sponsors. We will ship the robot to people's homes, and then they log on Zoom. We help them build it. We help them program it, because you have to increase access in order to increase inclusion. And you have to grow the knowledge base, and that just cannot happen if you're pricing people out of the market.
Yeah, and you have on your website as well, and I don't want to say it wrong. How do you pronounce the first word? Because
it's noir. It's a French word for Black, but it's NoireSTEMinist. So a STEMinist is basically a woman who promotes STEM among other women, but NoireSTEMinist means I also promote it among Black and brown people as well. I think everyone can get excited about a robot. So whether you want to be in STEM or not, it's a great way to educate you about what we do and to get you a little STEM in your life.
Yeah, and a great website, and we'll definitely get everybody the link as well. But I do have some questions from the students.
Absolutely.
So we got some good ones here. This one is Krishan Smith. He's one of our football players here at Velma Jackson, and he asked, as a woman, what did you have to do to overcome to get where you are today?
Well, I talked a little bit about this when I talked about my journey through Georgia Tech. Being in this area and not seeing a lot of people that look like you and act like you, it means you sometimes have to teach people how to treat you. You're going to deal with a lot of imposter syndrome, as well as implicit or unconscious bias, which means some people have an expectation of how you're going to act and what you're going to look like, and it doesn't stop. I experienced that as an engineer at Ford, where people thought I looked a little young. They had never seen a Black woman engineer before. So it was ageism, sexism, racism. It was all the isms at once. So you have to do that. Then once I became a professor, they had never seen a Black woman engineering professor. So there's a lot of being patient, but also knowing you're going to have to teach people how to treat you and educate them that there is no one mold for what an engineer looks like. I said, I'm here to break the face of engineering, break that mold of what you think it looks like, so that you can see yourself in it. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you're super smart, you're a nerd, I could never do that. No, I failed classes too. I also didn't always do well academically, but what I did have is I had a purpose, vision, mission. I was dedicated and I was disciplined, that nothing was going to stop me from having what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and one thing I always say is, just because you're the first at something doesn't mean you can't be the best at something as well.
And
Because
doesn't mean you have to be the
look at
last
Mae
either.
Jemison and people like that. She was the first
Absolutely.
Black woman to space, but she was an unbelievable astronaut on top of that. So just because you're the first at something doesn't mean you can't knock it out of the park when you are that first.
Absolutely. You're exactly right.
This is Tykevian Boyd. He's a sophomore, really interested in video game design when he graduates from high school. That he asked, what do you predict is in the future of engineering and robotics?
So I did a talk last week at the National Museum of African American History and Culture on Afrofuturism, and that was exactly what I talked about. I think the future, and actually I think video games are going to play a big part in that. My daughter is also really big into video games. Smash Bros is hers, and Mario Kart. But I think that the integration of the software development and the technologies will start to come to fore in places like we're going to see more autonomous vehicles. I see a future where we are going to see more of, obviously, AI, Chat GPT, all of that stuff is not going anywhere. We have to be aware that there's bias in it. Anything that people are involved in is going to have some bias, because everyone has bias. It's just a matter of being aware of it and making sure that you mitigate it so that injustice does not happen, because we've already started to see places where in this AI field, when we're not aware of the bias and we don't mitigate it, then we see that some people have been arrested for, facial recognition algorithms that aren't good on Black and brown faces. So for the future, I think the ability to be able to design software and use software. So thinking about, and in the context of video games, not just being a consumer of technology, but being a designer of technology, knowing how to write video games, knowing how to integrate software with hardware like you do with robotics, so that now if we're looking at these intelligent systems that may be cars driving around without humans in them, like we already have robots that are now delivering pizzas and Amazon packages, then you're going to need somebody who not only has the ability to be able to remotely fly these things, like with a game controller, like a drone, etc., but also be able to develop the software to have them be able to move around safely without hitting people, running into people, dropping boxes on people's heads, having these autonomous vehicles that recognize if a dog runs across the street or a kid runs after a ball in the middle of the street. So having those skill sets of not just being able to use technology, but create technology are extremely important in our future.
Yeah, and then even if you even just want to, if you want to be on the consumer side, there's a lot of money to be made in the gaming industry. It's not going away at
Oh,
all.
absolutely. Absolutely.
This is a good one. This is Michael Sherrill, one of our football players here. He's a sophomore, and he
Not the
asked, "What
football
made you want to
players.
focus?" Yeah, we got a lot of athletes here. He asked, "What made you want to focus on electrical engineering and robotics as opposed to other areas of engineering?"
So it was some of my classes. Like I said, the math I really loved, the controls I really loved. And then while at Georgia Tech, I took a robotics course. And one of the things I was sad about is at the time, those robots were so expensive that only the graduate students and the professors got to touch them. So even though we were in the class, we could write programs for them, we could write the code, but we had to stand behind a glass and watch them work. Industrial manipulators are those larger robot arms, like in a plant. They're so dangerous that they could actually kill you by knocking you across the floor. So not only was it a safety feature, but it was also an expense thing. They didn't want us to break it. Well, one of the challenges with that is hands-on and minds-on and active learning are extremely important for mastering concepts. So I had always said, even as a student, that someday I'm going to be an engineering professor. Now, this is with my 2.5 GPA and my 2 failed engineering classes. I decided I'm going to be a professor, but when I do it, I'm going to do robotics in a different way. So I teach robotics, but I use robots that are accessible and inclusive enough that students can actually touch them, build them. I have 3D printer files so students can print out and make their own robot.
Wow.
Because there's some learning opportunities that are missed if you cannot touch the thing, if you can't take it apart, put it back together, see how the things fit together, all those things you would learn on a robotics team or in an engineering class, being able to develop your own code so that you can debug it and troubleshoot it and figure out, I missed a semicolon right here, or I forgot to declare that variable, or whatever that is. There's some important things that happen there. And that's why I love the electrical engineering controls, because I could do more than look at the robot. I could actually touch it and program it and see something that I created in my mind come to life and move around on the floor.
That's awesome. Well, I just got one more from the students. This is Rondell Ellis. He's in 9th grade, and he asked, "What is the most important part of a robot?"
Well, I'm biased. I'm an electrical engineer. And if you ask a mechanical or computer science, they're going to say something different. But obviously, I'm going to say the controller. So for example, I'm a controls engineer. So if I need my robot to follow a wall or follow a line or track a color, then the controller that I have created in the brain allows it to do that. Now it has to work with the sensors. So designing a controller, but if I don't have infrared or sonar, or I have laser or all of those sensors, then it doesn't really matter. But I'm obviously going to say the electronics and controls. Now, my question for you is, did any young women ask a question?
We don't have any in here with us today.
I am
But
not
a lot
happy
of young
with
women
that,
are going to
Greg.
see this.
And next time I come back, a young woman better ask a question or I'm not coming back. Not one woman?
We don't have any with us today. We're a small school, but a lot of young women are going to see this.
Please.
Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it. Well, we're almost out of time. And we thank you so much for taking some time for us. Just unbelievable knowledge, unbelievable resume. But before we go, first of all, tell us again where to find your website.
NoireSTEMinist.com, NoireSTEMINIST.com. That's a mouthful. Or DRCA Berry on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
Yeah, and you're a great follow. I've started following you, and I'm getting a lot out of it as well.
Thank you.
But before we go, just for these kids that I have with me now and the ones that'll see this later, why does engineering and robotics need them, especially these young ladies and especially these young minority students? These jobs are not going away. So why do they really need to look into getting into this field?
So I will tell you one thing. Do it because you have a passion to be creative and to create and to learn and explore and see the world look differently in the future. We need you here because diverse, multidisciplinary teams create the best solutions to the world's problems. And there
Yeah.
are problems in a global, diverse community. And if the engineers and scientists who are creating the solutions for that diverse and global community don't look like it, there's some missed opportunities there. Or there's some things we needed to design for that this community didn't even think of. We need you in those spaces because we need your voice, we need your vision, and we need those unique experiences that only you can bring to the table.
Absolutely. And just incredible information, incredible stuff. And we thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Dr. Carlotta Berry, all the way from Indianapolis, Indiana, Rose Hulman Institute there in Terre Haute as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Oh, you're pretty awesome too. Thank you so much. And I'll get you this recording very soon.
Absolutely. And I will share it in order to, also amplify your community.
I appreciate it. Talk to you soon, buddy.
All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.